Hi, everyone. I'm back with an interview with one of my classmates from Northwestern University, Stefania Arias. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. I was practicing it before we started recording, and then as soon as I hit record, it was like, all right. So
Got it.
I'm speaking with Stefania, and we attend Northwestern together through their online program for Masters of Counseling course. Um, and we both kind of study autism. Me because I am late diagnosed autistic adult. Her because her son is autistic. So Stephania, welcome. Um, what led you to suspect that your son might be autistic?
For me, it was when he was 3 year old, but his doctor did when he was about 7 months at developmental st milestones that were delayed. Um, but I was in denial about it at first when it was coming from the doctors. And kind of like when he turned 1, 2, there was still absolutely no words being said, or even at 1.5. But I noticed it when he was 3, and I kind of accepted it and decided to want to move forward with, yeah, sending over that evaluation or the assessment packet they send you for the wait list for a diagnosis. And so he was um he was throwing a lot of tantrums, like, and I remember in one of our class, I think it was assessments, and we were just learning about like what it's a normal tantrum amount in a day and when it's not. And his was like over 10. Like he has so many triggers. He was starting to hit himself, throw things. It doesn't matter what it was. If it was a plate full of food, he was pulling my hair, he was slapping me, and he was hitting things so hard to the point that he was like detaching the closet door, which was a sliding closet door where I live. But yeah, those were like the signs that I saw, and some sensory issues to be underweight because he doesn't eat a lot of variety of foods. He has to eat the same thing like every day.
RFID. He's an RFID autistic, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder.
Yeah.
That sounds like it would have been exhausting for any parent. How did you find the strength to keep going? We hear all these horror stories about parents who just kind of give up because it's so challenging. How did you keep going?
I think for me, what motivated me was the childhood that I had. Like, I didn't want to like discipline him in a way that's gonna have him fear me. So I try to stay patient about it, and just like joining groups on Facebook was helpful in knowing I wasn't alone, like joining other moms who also were struggling with kids with that similar behaviors. And but yeah, with we are Hispanic in my culture, and a lot of the Hispanics, they discipline by hitting, or they say that's just, them, being not rebellious, but just like um you having to discipline them to kind of like respect you. That's how, since they're little, that's how they are. So you've got to like, do some physical disciplining, like scare them with the shoe or something, even though you're not gonna hit them with the shoe. So those were some of the like advice from like people in my culture that they were giving me. And that's not what I wanted to do. So it did even cause me to have to distance myself with certain family members and friends because they were not understanding me, and the type of advice they were giving me is not what I thought was helpful for my son. So I think the groups online, and like when I started to see my son's behavior, I was already in like maybe my fifth quarter or fourth quarter of my graduate program, and I was doing some already research on autism, and I saw that a lot of redirecting is what helps. So I did a lot of that. And yeah, and just like, trying to tell his father about it, like, and coming up with stuff together to have more support. But I think, yeah, the mom groups helped a lot. And those friends who did see that behavior and understand where I was coming from with, even the ones in that same culture as me who weren't like, you should do this and hit him or that. And they were more understanding, and they were just like, it'll get better, like, I'm sorry you're going through that. And so yeah, having the few support system that I did have were helpful.
Yeah. So a lot of parents of autistic children will kind of move in the direction of ABA therapy. Was that something that ever crossed your mind? And tell me a little bit about what you think of ABA therapy, because I know it is very um, up in the air right now. There's a lot of people who don't like it because of the old ways of practicing ABA, where it was very traumatic for the autistic individual. And it has started moving away from that, but there are still individuals who practice ABA that rely on the old ways as opposed to the new ways. So it is kind of difficult to find ABA therapist that is supportive of you, and who you are supportive of as well. So tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, so actually, because of my ignorance in the first 3 years of my son's life, and listening to family's advice, we shouldn't always take because um even in not only my culture, but like I noticed, like I guess it's something that even like back, I guess a few years ago, there wasn't that much awareness with autism behavior. I didn't send a evaluation for him to get a diagnosis until he was 3.5, and I was in New Hampshire at the time. So now that I'm back in North Carolina, which is where we originally were, because we were only about 6 months in New Hampshire when I noticed those symptoms worsened and I was on my own. Now that I'm in North Carolina again, I sent a packet over for the assessment to get a date for the diagnosis in New Hampshire about a year ago, or a little more, but the wait list there was like 2 years. And I also did one about 9, 10 months ago now here in North Carolina. But I did call and they said I should be hearing back at the end of this year or the beginning of next year to get in a date for a diagnosis. But I have been hearing about ABA and I actually would like to put him in it. Because from what I haven't heard much, about ABA yet, because that's not somewhere he's at yet, since he will need a diagnosis. I have tried to reach out to them and they're like, yeah, you need a diagnosis. Um, but um, but like so far, we're on a wait list for occupational therapy in the meantime, but he has to see a speech therapist, the same one since he was one, on and off. And I asked her recently what her thoughts on ABA are because she does sometimes see some kids at the ABA center when parents are at work. And she said that she has found it in her clients to be helpful. And and I do hear that for some people they think it's like unethical or something, the way that they try to like repetitive like get them to do something. Um, but I would have to like I'd have to really like have an interview with them and see, what kind of based on his needs, what kind of things are they gonna work on him with. But with my son, I know that for him, visuals has been working like going in since he's still pretty nonverbal. He's just now started to say up to 3 words together. But you just going to a picture and showing us kind of what's next and what he wants and is what's been working for us. So like that's something the tantrums have decreased too a lot since that time in New Hampshire and when I was on my own. Um but when he is very upset, like when you take a game away, like I would like to know, yeah, with ABA, if if there's something that they have to kind of be reminding him over and over again, like I'm okay with that because I don't mean even for me as a parent, I don't know how else I can try and my son as a 4 year old who's nonverbal be able to learn like don't hit yourself, don't throw things when you're upset. So for me, I feel like depending on what they said they're gonna work on, if it sounds like that's what they've been doing, it's been working for other kids, I will be open to trying that out for my son, like trial and error. But but yeah, I'm willing to give it a try since I'm hearing from, like close people like his speech therapist that is something she's seen that has helped progress on her clients.
So you mentioned about how you get him to communicate via pictures. So were you trained to use the PEX system, which is, for those who don't know, it's picture exchange communication system. And it's essentially just using pictures to for the autistic child or the nonverbal child to tell you what they need, everyday tasks. When my son was in pre-K, he used PEX. he had like a little necklace that they made for him of pictures where, had a toilet or food, or something like that on it. And then eventually they taught him, the sign language for bathroom, and he would do that. So were you trained in PEX, or was this something that just kind of came naturally?
Yeah, I guess it did come naturally. I was not trained on that, and that's actually interesting to hear. Yeah, like that they can use a necklace too for, even times when we're out and we don't have those pictures at home. Because um, I believe, yeah, the speech therapist might have brought something up about visuals, and then I looked up on Amazon like visual stuff to help autistic kids, and it came up that stuff that has like Velcro, is that what you call them? Like stickies to it, and it came with its own pictures, but to make it even more simpler for him, what I do is I print actual pictures of him doing what the things that we want him to do or that he might want to do. So like I have a picture of him cooking, I have a picture of us brushing our teeth, I have a picture of him sleeping. I took a picture of him sleeping. I try to take a picture of absolutely everything, or like when it's book time, so that we can, show him. And there's a thing, a little white square that I laminated the paper so that and cut them into pieces so that when he's done with something he could put an X. So that's something that he's been doing that's been working. But I think just even in the research that I've done too, when I read about, redirections and like I think I did see visuals a lot too. It just kept coming to me like from the speech therapists and other mamas in the Facebook groups who have kiddos with autism, like, and it became something that I'm like, okay, let me just try this. And it seems to be working.
Sounds like you pretty much it just came naturally to you, whereas with
Yeah.
our son when he was younger, um, we didn't there were things that we noticed, he wasn't talking, or he started talking and then he would revert, to, we call it honking. He would honk like a goose, um, whenever he was trying to communicate. Um, and we didn't really think much of it. We figured he would talk when he was ready to talk. Um, and then other people started mentioning it, and we we had been discussing getting him into speech therapy, but we couldn't without a referral from a professional. Fortunately, my wife's stepmother was a teacher, and she was able to put in that referral for us, to get him into the, speech classes, and it helped him a lot. He's still in speech classes. He's 13. He still has a little bit of trouble with R's. Um, they come out as W's almost. Um, but that's completely normal. I've had other family members who struggled with R words and stuff. Um, we've spoken previously about, um, not just your family members, but other family members of his, um, who you've kind of gone to and expressed concern about certain traits he's experiencing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, like I went to my son's father, mom, and it wasn't more so like for advice. I think a lot of people just resort to like giving an advice. Like you're kind of telling people like this is what my son's struggling with, where doctors recommending this, and a lot of people are just like, don't listen to the doctors. So one of the things that I did hear from my son's father's side of the family is that that's normal, that they're still not talking at 2 or 3, that his father didn't start talking until after 4, and there's yeah, that and I think same happened with my grandma too. Like she was saying, that happens that they start talking late after, and a lot of people find it absurd that they're like, "Oh, they have to say 50 words by 1." Like I think I forgot, yeah, what it says in the milestone. And so when people have that sort of reaction, or like family members telling you stuff like that, and is my first child, my only child, and you don't even know what age they're supposed to. And a lot of the friends that I had, their kids were already like 6 and they were older, so it was like a part, of like my life that I didn't have experience on, that I just kind of went with what people were saying, which is why it took so long even to send the assessment to get him a diagnosis, which if I would have done it before and just listened to the doctor's recommendation, he probably would have had his diagnosis already by now and would have been already on ABA getting help. But yeah, those are kind of like some of the family stuff I heard from my family. Or that it's gonna go away, the certain tantrums too. Like that's, yeah, that's just because they're at that age, it'll go away too. But he still hits us still today.
That can be one of our biggest hurdles to overcome, right? Is what other people are telling us. When my oldest was growing up, um, I had a lot of different people telling me different things. Um, and I struggled because um, their actions and everything were really stressing me out. And me being undiagnosed autistic at that time, I was trying to go based off of how I was raised and how I would receive spankings and stuff if I acted out and all this. And I'll admit I wasn't the greatest parent in the world at the time. I had poor mental health, being undiagnosed autistic, not understanding why I was processing the world differently, on top of having so many different people saying different things, how to parent. Um, it was hard, you know. And
Yeah.
kudos to you for being able to sort through all that and understanding the type of parent you want to be. Unfortunately, I was not able to do that, and that's partially why my oldest and I don't really have a relationship to this day, because I was a toxic parent, you know. And so I do applaud you for not being one of those toxic parents. Um, I have taken what I've learned and everything and used that towards my kids now. Um, but how have other family members treated your son? Have they tried to spank him or whatever? You know, tell me a
Um,
little bit about that.
I I think like his when I was in New Hampshire and my son's father's side of the family saw his behavior, they kind of did catch like, because he has a cousin that's 3 year old, is my son's father's sister's daughter, so like his niece, and she didn't have that. So they kind of saw his behavior and they knew that, he needs help. So they didn't believe like with him it's something that they, should discipline him up, in that way. And but a lot of before they saw that behavior, I'm not sure if it came from his side of the family or like a little, maybe my mom too, where they were like, "Oh, do him a pow pow," and in my culture, it's like go like that to them when they're, throwing things and doing what they're not supposed to and hitting us. And there was a time that I did do that, like when I was in New Hampshire, he was showing all of this behavior that to me came out of nowhere, that, throwing things, hitting me. I would do a pow pow on his hand, but this didn't teach him that not to do, because like as we've been learning, this is not what's going to, they're neurodivergent. To them, they're not processing the things that a kid with the neurotypical, brain is able to process. They're not thinking this means stop what you're doing. To him, he actually, whenever this behavior he couldn't control, when he was upset of throwing things and hitting me, when he would do things like that, now he just started hitting himself. And I was like, well, that's not the message I was trying to give. Like now to him, he still can't, it didn't fix that he to control the emotion and not throw things. Instead, now after he does still that same behavior I didn't want him to do, he just hits himself after. And that's when I knew like I can't discipline him like that anymore. Um, and I said that to my family and everybody who ever tried to tell me like, you need to discipline him doing that. I just told them, like that's not gonna work. He just actually started doing it to himself. So I'm not, you know, and like I appreciate you giving me kudos, but I do want to take some accountability that I do lose it sometimes. Not in a way that I'm gonna like physically harm him, but just that I'll scream sometimes and I'm like, stop, And like I've tried to get better at that because I know that if anything that scares him more, and I will give him a hug and I'll get down to his level and I'll hug him and I say sorry, I was sad and mad and like Yeah, I try to, with him, I've had to learn emotional regulation, which was not seen in my family growing up. We're known for yelling, not being able to regulate our emotions. So that's something that for me, like, I had to literally very hardly ingrain in myself not to do that behavior I grew up seeing like every day. So with my son, I've been able to learn.
Yeah, your reaction is completely natural, right? Even those of us who are artistic, we have meltdowns. We have times where we lash out and we can't really control it at times. And when we're stressed, when we've gone through all our spoons and everything, and we just can't take it anymore, we break down. It
Yeah.
happens with autistics, it happens with allistics, it happens with everybody. I don't think it's just a, I don't think that's what makes a person a bad parent or a good parent, it's what makes us human, right?
Yeah,
Because
definitely
we're,
some guilt there after every time I lost it. I'm like, oh, I'm horrible. Yeah.
no, I don't think you're horrible. I don't think your son thinks you're horrible. I don't, the only people who would judge you are the ones who want to hide their own demons, right? Who want to pretend to be the perfect parent. There's no
Right.
perfect parent out there. It's just
Yeah.
we're all flying by the seat of our pants, especially when it comes to our firstborns. We haven't done this before. We've never been parents before. So we're
Yeah.
learning as we go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've gotta say, like, now that the behavior after he turned 3, because I know, yeah, before, I mentioned them, me even myself being very in denial about it, and the family seeing him hitting himself in the head, like, and just like people seeing it with their own eyes instead of me being on the phone calling them saying like he's doing this. Even my mom too now, like they're more aware of his need for help. And I think what's been the hardest though, that they still seem to not understand me about, is how hard it is to find anybody to watch him. I'm super overprotective because it's hard to put him somewhere that is just one curriculum for all, like a daycare of just 2 people and 20 kids, because he's gonna be the one standing out of everybody. Or I fear that I'm gonna get a call that he can't be there or something happened. And he's in a preschool now that is called We Rock the Spectrum, and they are, a company that brings awareness to autism, and the teachers there have trainings or are certified in working with special needs kids. So that's where I feel comfortable leaving my son, because there's more kids like him there, and they are trained to work with those meltdowns they experience. So and they even recommend, you bring their own food, because we understand that they, are picky eaters, because, they have their safe foods. And it's a place where I feel comfortable leaving him. I feel he would be comfortable at with other kids like him, and a professor who will understand him. And so yeah, like, but I have family members who are just, because it's a very expensive school, and it's also only 901. So a lot of people are just like, you could put him in a daycare, it will have cameras. You could put him here, you could put him there. It doesn't have to be private. It doesn't have to be this. And I'm just like, okay. And it's hard still to have to not have people understand why I am so worried and why I'm very particular about where I put him in. And he still doesn't have a diagnosis, which I try to explain to people about. But thankfully, like my mom has been more understanding, and she's been supporting me like throughout my grad program, even financially, to be able to be there for my son and finish school, and have him just, do those hours from 9 to 1 at that preschool. Um, but hopefully, yeah, by the end of the year, when they said they might call, he'll be 5 in January. So by then, if he has a diagnosis, you know, once he starts kindergarten, I'll feel a little better about knowing that he can get some individual assistance and more accommodations.
So before we started, I had mentioned, that I wanted to touch upon how there's a lot of research around middle class, um, Caucasian males, uh, and autism, but there's very little research around other cultures, other ethnicities, and everything. But I want to touch upon that, but I also want to touch upon concerns going forward because we do see a lot of problems in society where autistics are, you know, involvement with police and everything. And to compound that, the multiculturalism where other ethnicities and cultures also have poor experiences with the police and what that looks like. So let's start with how the little research we have into other cultures and in autism, and then we'll move naturally into the other. So tell me a little bit about how um, your culture sees normal, and I know you've touched upon it a little bit with the spanking and stuff like that. But tell me a little bit about that and how it relates to autism.
Um, I would say, like I mean, because I wasn't in the Dominican Republic, like I didn't get raised where I was raised with the culture, but I didn't see much about how that's like, shows up over there. But I feel like there's a lot that it's not normal. Like when I went into grad school, like for me, that it's not, that to them it is. Like, if your 6-year-old and 5-year-old is just constantly in a tablet, or, that's the only way to get them to be calm and let you do what you gotta do, like they're okay with that. And like they're okay with if you're somebody who's always isolated in your room in my culture. Like they're just like, oh, at least they're in their home, in the room. They're not out with bad influence and possibly end up doing drugs and stuff like that. So in my culture, parents prefer for you to just be in your room, which I still don't think it's good to just be isolated in the room. Um, and then
Sounds
for
like it'd be almost preferable for a
yeah,
parent if their child was autistic, right?
um, oh, you're saying like if they already know in my culture if they have autism?
Well, not no, not necessarily, but like kind of like what you were saying, like what's considered normal in the Dominican culture, where we see autistic here, um, there's the myth of no eye contact, doing
Yeah.
things by yourself,
Yeah.
stacking things, lining things up, stuff like that. Um, so let's kind of go off of it from that perspective, I guess.
Oh, well, to be honest with you, I think if anything, I am the first of the whole entire family in my culture that has brought up the word autism. So I honestly wouldn't, yeah, I'm not sure because I haven't really had a friend, in my culture who has a kid with autism for me to kind of hear like, what are the signs that they saw, in their culture that they noticed it was not normal or normal to them. Um, I feel like, which, I'm happy to be able to, for my family, have been the one bringing awareness about autism, but like I haven't really like been able to hear from, Hispanic community yet, like, from my friends or family that, of behaviors they saw before getting a diagnosis, like of a child that has been diagnosed with autism. Like, I mean, I do feel like if anything in my culture, they would probably go undiagnosed.
The way you talk about it, it does seem like more of the undesirable traits of autism in the ethno-European culture um, would be actually more accepted in your culture.
Yeah.
So
Actually, yeah, that was a good way to put it because um they will if oh my God, like this just opened up a whole new thing too because like how in our family marital and couples counseling class, we did that research on autism and we're learning about family approaches, and there are cultures who they're very, I guess, like that word embellishment that we use, like they're very they rely, like there's an emotional need there. And in the Dominican Republic, families are like so close together that I feel like this need for a child to like need you, if anything, like they are benefiting from that, so they're not gonna think like that's a problem. If anything, that's they're gonna be happy to know that, well, it's like that from, a lot of parents that they'll, they don't mind their kids, like if they're struggling in the future, which is like a clear sign of, hey, this person is an adult struggling with this, unstable job, unstable home. You would think like this adult needs help. There's something going on cognitively. And they're just like, oh no, they'll use that as an opportunity to be able to just, have their son be with them and like have family close. And and I feel like, yeah, they don't see it as an issue because they don't want to see it as an issue because in a way it's kind of also it's bringing in family together too, if that
Really
makes sense.
yeah, really interesting way of looking at it. I know in some cultures, uh, like over in China, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. They have that as a saying where, autistic children are forced to mask because if you stick out, you're not welcome. So you've got to keep that mask on. So it's nice to hear about a culture who's more accepting, even if it might be more for a selfish reason, of
Yeah.
keeping the children close to the parents, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but that's good to hear. Um, so tell me about your perspective on concerns you may have for the future, such as issues that your son might face with law enforcement, stuff like that.
Uh, and I'm super overprotective. We've already talked about, my fear of putting him anywhere. But yeah, I once saw online about a 14, 15-year-old who he got his Nintendo Switch snatched from him. And the headline was autistic 14, 15-year-old. So I'm assuming they knew he has an autism diagnosis. But the teacher, I guess, snatched a Nintendo Switch from him and he beat her up badly, that he went to prison. And these are the sort of intervention that I want my son to have now for him to not react that way. And I wouldn't even want a teacher to knowing that this is like the thing that, it wasn't good on both sides. Like if this is their safe thing and then you just snatch it from them, I feel like that was just, their brain immediately thinks danger. I need what's soothing me and stimulating me. And I know for my son when he gets into a game, he hits us when we take it from him. So I don't want him to have that reaction when he's like 15 and 14 and start, beating up the teacher. Even if it wasn't the right time for them to just snatch something like that from him, I want him to be able to respond to it calmly.
Mhm.
And I think my fear in seeing a lot of news of their behavior and just, the one who, there was one about an autistic boy who was shot by the police. And so I wanna, it's a fear that I have and why I, just hope that the interventions help, like ABA and stuff like that, for him to be able to, as an adult, know how to, handle this, even though he is neurodivergent, I want to protect him and I want to, in a way, it's like, if you're with the police, like, do this, even though it may be hard, like I'm afraid, yeah,
Yeah.
just because of what I've been seeing, because their reaction is not something that, they are easily able to control in the way a neurotypical person is. And I'm just hoping, yeah, with intervention it can help, but it's definitely a fear for me when he gets
Yeah.
older.
And police with their training and everything. Some police departments are getting better about being autistic informed or autistic trained. Um, but there is still that training where if you feel threatened, you draw your weapon, you know, and that can be very frightening for an autistic, the parent of an autistic, um, or to compound it, somebody of another culture who are also being,
Yeah.
um, for lack of a better word, attacked by police for just based on their skin color, you know?
He's got that intersectionalities going on, kind of
Yeah.
like we've been learning about, yeah. And I think, yeah, you could like evidently see when you see my son that he's not white.
Mhm. So, with everything we've learned in this program, um, and in undergrad, I'm not sure what your course of study was in undergrad. I was a psychology major. I took special education courses. I took neuroscience psychology classes on top of psychology and sociology. And I think the amount of information for students on neurodivergence, specifically autism, could fill up probably half an hour class session at the college level of what they're actually teaching. What would you like to see universities and undergraduate colleges do to help improve education around neurodivergence, specifically autism?
Yeah, I think but I'm glad you bring that up because when we were taking psychopathology in our grad program, we didn't even go over autism. We just went to the most common ones, I guess, the counselors see, like bipolar, depression, anxiety, and personality disorders. But we didn't go through autism. And that's something that I myself, thankfully, because I am experiencing with my son, decided to do my own research on. And thankfully, I've been able to get some feedback from professors on, what do I need to work on, what did I miss, what did I get wrong, and that can help, enhance my knowledge. But if it wasn't for my son and my own, willingness to volunteer into wanting to look more into it, I don't think I would be as well informed as I am about autism. And and yeah, and sometimes, like we once talked about, with the fact that he doesn't have a diagnosis, I still have some people are like, well, he doesn't have a diagnosis. And, well, then why every time I find all this research, I can relate to them so much. Like, and if it's not what he ended up having, which I'm not gonna lie, sometimes people will get in your head still, and I'm like, could it be something else? Because I see ADHD sometimes overlap, and then when you look up, a kid hitting themselves, ADHD comes up too. And sometimes I am afraid that maybe I am, overdoing something that's not right, and because of people getting to my head. But like we do talk about, all of the, all of his behavior, and it's stuff that you saw like with your son, with yourself, and I feel like I am on the right track when it comes to this. But yeah, I think that I feel like learning more about neurodivergent is very important. Like in our multicultural class too, I don't like neurodivergent was not like one of our modules, but LGBTQ plus like was. And I think that is an important community that we have to be, aware of, and like, ageism, ableism, like disability. Like we are learning about all of this, but I do think neurodivergence, there's a lot more of that community that's coming out now, and I think that's one that we need to be trained more about. So, like we should have had a whole module on how to work with neurodivergent people and the stuff that we see and notice when we are working with one, because they might not even know about it. Like you were masking for so long.
There definitely should be a module in every course throughout the program, right? For working with neurodivergence. One thing I've found working at my internship site is there are more undiagnosed autistics out there than what clinicians actually realize because it's so common to misdiagnose them with generalized anxiety disorder, with depression, with bipolar or borderline personality disorder, or whatever. Sometimes even schizophrenia spectrum disorders um, are more uh, commonly diagnosed than autism because of the lack of understanding around it, really. And that shouldn't be the case. And you were talking about how your son isn't officially diagnosed yet and all this. And I live by the perspective that diagnosis, especially the official diagnosis from a clinician, is not the end all be all. Clinicians get it wrong too. We're all human. As long as you do the research yourself and you are meeting or seeing the criteria and that individual is meeting the criteria, I personally have no problem with an individual self-diagnosing themselves or like you, a clinician who has a son and you identifying your son as autistic. Um, There are a lot of clinicians out there, as especially professors, in every program who you shouldn't self-diagnose. People are over-diagnosing based on TikToks and all that. That's not what's happening. Sure,
Yeah.
TikTok
For me,
is
it wasn't.
raising awareness and making us more easily able to identify certain traits, right? But it doesn't stop there. No one's diagnosing based off of social media. We're
Yeah.
seeing the social media posts and then going to the diagnostic criteria, going to the research. And it took me, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder three separate times in my life before I got my autism diagnosis. Once when I was in fifth grade, um, I met all the criteria, but at the time, it was right when the DSM-4 came out, so they were likely still using the DSM-3 criteria. And so I got a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis there. Then in my 20s, they were using the DSM-4. Um, the DSM-5 had not come out yet. And I got a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis there. Then in my 30s, from my medical doctor, I got a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis because when it comes to general practitioners, they don't go based off of all the criteria in the DSM, right? They go off of based off what you're telling them. Hey, I experienced anxiety and depression. Okay, generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis. It's such a common diagnosis. It's overdiagnosed, really.
Yeah.
And in practice, I like to see generalized anxiety disorder not as the first diagnosis I go for, but the last one. Because when it comes to anxiety and depression, yeah, we can say that we're experiencing these things, but what's causing it? What's ultimately leading the individual to experiencing the anxiety, the depression, the mood swings, and all this other stuff? There's an underlying cause that can't be explained by a GAD diagnosis. And I think
Yeah.
that's what a lot of professionals are forgetting is that it doesn't end. We can continue diagnosis. Yeah, the insurance companies are forcing us to diagnose right away, but it shouldn't end there. We shouldn't just stick with that initial diagnosis. We need to keep looking at the individual and seeing if there's one that better fits.
Yeah.
And
I
I think that's what helps with self-diagnosis too, because we're not relying on that professional sticking with that one original diagnosis, right?
Yeah, I agree. And like, I know, yeah, there's that like pressure, yeah, from insurance and having to put in a diagnosis. And like, for me, yeah, I feel like it would definitely take me like 2 months or more to actually get an idea of more than what they've just, are saying, and more of so what I'm seeing a pattern of, and, in their interpersonal relationships too, like in the counseling session. Like, I definitely think it's deeper than just, yeah, that things they say in the session after like 3 days. And yeah, I agree that, like, just generalized anxiety disorder being like the first like pick for everything, and it's just like it could be so much more than just that. And like, yeah, with what we were talking about, yeah, with like the self-diagnosing, like I was in denial for a long time about, like I don't think he has autism because my friend said this and my friend said that and my mom said this, and like, you know, you could see from me, like my son's speech therapist, his name's Elijah, that when he was 1, and she also noticed like the behavior, because when she would go to see him, he just wanted to be pushing this bee around with like wheels, and that's it. Like he didn't want to play with her any games. Like he was just fixated on this bee, and like it was every session she was coming to weekly that he was doing that same thing, and then she brought up autism, and when that doctor already did once, and I was like, here we go. And then she noticed that how I felt about it, but there was one time that I'm like, hey, so the doctor want to refer him for autism, and they want to get your input on how you've seen him behaving. And she was like, okay, yeah, I'll talk to them. And then when I talked to the when they talked to her, they ended up telling me, "Hey, we did refer him for autism." So I assumed then that his speech therapist said that he is showing signs. And like when I saw her again, I'm like, "Yeah, I guess they did refer him." Like mad that she said that he had like autistic traits too. And I was actually so in denial and bothered about it, if anything. And then she kind of like she kind of knew and she noticed it that she what she did, I feel like was such a good way to try and get it in my head without feeling pressuring me. She shared a psychologist who is who she specializes like a lot on autism's Instagram account. And I was like, huh. Looked it up so she could see, yeah, I looked them up. I went through some of the stuff, and that was when I started to believe more because they were so putting traits on boys, traits on girls, traits on just like, autistic children. And that's when I had told you that I saw on there that if they're lining toys up and looking at it in the corner of their eyes, then that's possible signs. And I'm like, he does that like every day with every toy. And I was
Can you
like, this is
demonstrate that for us so that other parents might be able to understand what you're talking about?
what?
Can you demonstrate that for us so that other
Oh,
parents might be able to understand kind of
yes,
what you're talking about?
yes. The corner of the eye thing.
Yeah.
Yes. So he would line up a bunch of cars first or whatever he was lining up, and then he would first like get sideways and then go like this and walk slowly as he's looking at it like this. Yeah. And I have videos of it too that I use for presentations when I was talking about autism in some of my assignments. And like he did that for so long. Sometimes he will still do it too. Very rarely as he did it more when he was younger. But once I started seeing that, in the speech delayed, and they even have like education on speech delay versus autism because sometimes it could just be a speech delay. And like I was looking at everything and that's what led me to find out more about autism, which then led me to looking up on TikTok after I already had seen signs, not because TikTok told me, like people make it seem. After I was identifying with it way too much, with my son, I looked up, what are some autism signs on a 3-year-old? And then there were mothers showing videos of like their kids actually doing things that my son was doing. And then that's when I started to believe it more. And when I started my grad program, even started to do research on it and started to talk with my family with more of a voice instead of going, yeah, you're right. I was more like, no, because this is not okay. And like it actually gave me more confidence in the research and the things I've seen on my son to speak about and advocate for my son and what he needs. So for any mothers or fathers out there, definitely, trust your guts. And, when you have specialists telling you things, sometimes, give them the benefit of the doubt, right? Because, like, if they're pointing something out, it's because they've seen it in other kids they work with. And like it's something that, my speech therapist has seen on other autistic kids she's worked with because she is a speech therapist. So, she does work with a lot of nonverbals who essentially have autism after. And yeah, that's kind of like how what I wanted to get to and what led me to, after looking more up on social media. But really where I was hearing it from was professionals like the doctor, the speech therapist, and then I resorted to social media after. But yeah, like you said, I think when self-diagnosing comes with a lot of research, a lot of other people, professionals noticing these things, like I feel like it should be more, yeah, valid than just maybe one TikTok video talking about bipolar, let's say. You're like, I have that.
Yeah. So we are running low on time. I don't want to make this video too long to where people lose interest, right?
And I get it.
So, with that being said, um, we'll end with what do you plan on specializing in once you graduate? You'll be graduating in December, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll both be graduating in
Can't wait.
December. We will be the last winter graduating class at Northwestern. From that point on, they're going all
Oh,
every only summer graduations. So
oh, wow, I didn't know that.
yeah,
Oh, that's good because it really feels lonely seeing all these graduations online over the summer and I have to wait till December.
right. So what do you plan on specializing in once you get your license?
Um, So I am in the child and adolescent track, and I do want to specialize on trauma mainly. But since, with my son's experience, I have such a huge background with working with kids with autism, or not just working with kids with autism, but just like, noticing the behavior. I would love to like, like work with parents, kind of like that research thing I did in how to help, have the like patience and awareness when it comes to like family and like not directly work with autistic children, but I do want to work with just like the people who are having to, help autistic children, like the parents and being a support for them, especially single moms. But I do want to be able to, help support them because that has been something that was very hard for me because I didn't have a lot of support and it can often feel very lonely, but the groups did help. And like the families and friends who, did understand. But I do want to be of support like for families who have children of autism and for the parents and um but like working with the kids directly, yeah, like I wouldn't like specialize on that. But I wouldn't mind that, working with a neurodivergent. But I mean, like when they're so young at 4 years old, of course. Like that's something that, intervention, ABA and stuff like that. But as an adult, like I feel like I would be a little bit more better trained in working with, an adult who's neurodivergent. Um,
And as we know, neurodivergence is genetic, despite what RFK Jr. says. Um,
yeah.
and so if a child is neurodivergent, chances are one, if not both of his parents and other family members are
Yeah.
also neurodivergent as well. So it's very good that you are interested in working with families and are open to the idea of working with neurodivergent adults because if chances are if you see an autistic child, one if not both of their parents could also be autistic as well, right?
Right. Yeah. And since I am with all the research that I've done more familiar in seeing those like, 3-year-old, 4-year-old signs and even the younger ones that I was in denial about still, I feel like, if I am seeing a parent who's talking about like these things they're struggling with their kids, now I feel like I could point them out better and redirect them to a good place. Um, but I do need to educate myself more, which is why, yeah, like we were talking about, it needs to be, I think, in a lot of our modules when I see an adult, let's say, I think it is going to take me a little bit longer to recognize, that they are neurodivergent. But it is definitely like a population I would like to work with because, my son's not going to be a little kid forever. I am going to, as an adult, going to have to know, what works best with him and having a relationship with him. And, um, and yeah, I do mainly, want to work with children and adolescents who have experienced trauma and work with also adults, but mainly like children and adolescent. But yeah, I do need to widen my knowledge in working with neurodivergent like adolescents and adult.
Well, thank you for joining me today. Before we leave, is there anything else you would like the public to know about autism, whether it be other parents, family members, the police, other clinicians, or even schools in general?
Um, think like for me, it's always like gonna be like really bring awareness for, like the parents that are, struggling with the child with autism. And I'm always just gonna say, like they're not alone. And it can feel like you are alone, but you're not, join groups, talk with other moms who, are going through the exact same thing you are, what's worked for them, what hasn't worked for them. And yeah, just like, reaching out to those support because it can get very lonely, which is why, yeah, I wanna be able to be there for parents who are, struggling with this and not having that understanding from family and friends. Um, but yeah, it's scary, but yeah, definitely get support where you can and resources.
Thank you again for joining me today. Hopefully, we'll get a lot of views on this so that we can advocate for this community a lot more.
Yes, I hope so too. Well, thank you for having me.